Hurricane Maria had been merciless. The Category 5 storm tore through Millbrook, Louisiana, with winds exceeding 180 miles per hour, leaving behind a landscape that looked like a war zone. 3 days had passed since the eye of the storm moved on, but for the 8,000 residents of this small town, the nightmare was just beginning. Sarah Chin stood in what used to be her family's diner, the place where 3 generations had served the community. Now, twisted metal and debris filled the space where customers once gathered for morning coffee and evening conversations. The roof was completely gone, the walls partially collapsed, and everything she had worked for lay in ruins around her feet. "Mom, what are we going to do?" asked her 16-year-old daughter Emma, tears streaming down her dirt-stained face. Sarah had no answer. The insurance money wouldn't come close to covering the damage, and like most small business owners in Millbrook, she was barely surviving financially even before the hurricane hit. Across town, 72-year-old Vietnam veteran James Mitchell sat on the front steps of what remained of his home, staring at the destruction. His wife of 45 years, Dorothy, had passed away just 6 months earlier, and now the house filled with their memories was nothing but broken boards and shattered glass. His neighbor's boat sat in his living room, carried there by the storm surge that had risen 12 feet above normal levels. The official reports would later show that Hurricane Maria had caused $4.7 billion in damage to Louisiana alone. But numbers couldn't capture the human cost, the dreams destroyed, the lives upended, the hope that seemed as scattered as the debris littering every street. Federal emergency responders had arrived, but they were overwhelmed. The town felt forgotten, isolated, and increasingly desperate. As night fell on the 3rd day, many residents wondered if Millbrook would ever recover, or if this storm had finally killed their small town forever. 5 days after Hurricane Maria's devastation, Millbrook resembled a ghost town. The lucky ones had relatives in other states and had evacuated early. Those who remained, the elderly, the poor, the stubborn, and the simply unlucky, found themselves in an increasingly desperate situation. The town's only hospital had suffered severe structural damage. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, the head of emergency medicine, was trying to treat patients in a FEMA trailer with limited supplies. "We're running critically low on everything," she explained to the handful of nurses who had stayed behind. "Insulin, blood pressure medications, even basic antibiotics. People are going to die if we don't get help soon." At the emergency shelter set up in the high school gymnasium, one of the few buildings still intact, tempers were beginning to fray. Families who had lost everything were crammed together with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The Red Cross volunteers were doing their best, but resources were stretched impossibly thin. "Where's the government?" shouted Mike Thompson, a construction worker whose house had been completely leveled. "They promised help would come, but we're still here eating cold beans from a can while our kids sleep on gym mats." His outburst reflected the growing frustration felt by everyone in the shelter. Local officials were trying to coordinate relief efforts, but Mayor Patricia Williams found herself fighting a losing battle. Phone lines were still down, roads remained impassable, and every request for additional federal aid seemed to disappear into a bureaucratic void. "I've been calling every office in Washington," she told her exhausted staff. "We need heavy equipment, medical supplies, and temporary housing. We need it now, not next week." Sarah Chin had spent the day digging through the rubble of her diner, salvaging what little she could. Among the debris, she found a waterlogged photograph of her grandmother cutting the ribbon at the diner's grand opening in 1952. The image was barely recognizable, but it represented 3 generations of dreams now reduced to nothing. As another night fell over Millbrook, the residents faced a harsh reality. The world seemed to have forgotten their small town existed. On the 6th day after Hurricane Maria, something unprecedented happened. As Mayor Williams was conducting her morning briefing with exhausted city officials, her assistant burst into the room with a satellite phone. "Ma'am, you need to take this call. It's the president." Donald Trump's voice crackled through the static. "Mayor Williams? This is President Trump. I've been watching the news coverage of Millbrook, and frankly, I'm not happy with what I'm seeing. Your people have been forgotten, and that's not acceptable." The mayor nearly dropped the phone in shock. "Mr. President, we desperately need help," she managed to say. "Our people are suffering, and the federal response has been slow." Trump's reply was immediate. "That changes today. I'm personally taking charge of Millbrook's recovery. Air Force One is being prepped right now. I'll be there in 6 hours." Within hours, the sound of helicopters filled the air over Millbrook. Military transport planes began landing at the nearby airfield, carrying supplies, equipment, and personnel. But the real shock came when Air Force One touched down on what remained of the local airstrip. President Trump stepped off the plane wearing boots and a work shirt instead of his usual suit. He was accompanied by a team of federal officials, but he had also brought something more valuable: a convoy of supply trucks, medical equipment, and construction materials. "I'm not here for a photo op," he announced to the gathering crowd. "I'm here to work." Sarah Chin couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the president walking directly toward the ruins of her diner. Secret Service agents surrounded him, but Trump seemed oblivious to any danger as he stepped carefully through the debris. "You must be Sarah," he said, extending his hand. "I heard about your family's restaurant. 70 years in business, that's the American dream right there." James Mitchell, the Vietnam veteran, watched from his destroyed front yard as the president approached. "Sir, thank you for your service," Trump said, saluting the elderly man. "Now let's talk about getting you back on your feet. America doesn't abandon its heroes." For the first time since the hurricane, the people of Millbrook felt like someone with real power actually cared about their plight. "Let me tell you something about Americans," Trump said, standing on the makeshift platform erected in the high school gymnasium that evening. Nearly every remaining resident of Millbrook had gathered to hear him speak. "We don't stay down. We don't give up. And we sure as hell don't let a storm, no matter how big, defeat us." The crowd, which had been listless and dejected for days, began to stir with something they hadn't felt since before Maria hit: hope. Trump continued, his voice carrying through the damaged building. "I've seen a lot of disasters in my time as president, but I've never seen a community with more heart than Millbrook. You've taken care of each other, you've shared what little you had, and you've never stopped fighting." Dr. Rodriguez, who had been working around the clock in impossible conditions, felt tears in her eyes as Trump announced the immediate deployment of a fully equipped mobile hospital. "Your medical heroes have been performing miracles with nothing," he said, gesturing toward her. "Now they'll have everything they need." But it was what Trump said next that truly changed everything. "I'm not just here to give you government aid and then leave. I'm making Millbrook a personal priority. We're going to rebuild this town better and stronger than it ever was before. And I'm going to make sure it happens." Sarah Chin listened as Trump outlined specific plans for her diner. "Sarah, I want you to work with my people. We're going to help you rebuild, but we're also going to help you expand. This town needs its gathering place back." The Federal Recovery Coordinator handed Sarah a folder containing preliminary architectural plans and funding authorization. James Mitchell, despite his age and grief, found himself appointed as the community liaison for veteran services. "James, you fought for this country overseas," Trump said. "Now I need you to help fight for this community at home." The old soldier straightened his shoulders for the first time in months. As the evening progressed, Trump didn't just make promises, he gave specific timelines, assigned responsibilities, and provided direct phone numbers for federal officials. This isn't just talk, he emphasized. Starting tomorrow morning, Millbrook's renewal recovery begins. The transformation began at dawn. Federal contractors arrived with heavy equipment to clear debris and repair critical infrastructure. The Army Corps of Engineers deployed teams to assess and rebuild the levee system. Most importantly, FEMA established a permanent disaster recovery office right in Millbrook, ensuring that red tape wouldn't slow down the process. Sarah Chin watched in amazement as a team of construction workers began clearing the site of her diner. But they weren't just clearing. They were already laying the foundation for a larger, more modern restaurant. The federal coordinator explained that Trump had personally reviewed and approved her expansion plans overnight. The president said Millbrook's gathering place should be big enough for the whole community, he told her. Dr. Rodriguez was overwhelmed by the medical supplies and equipment arriving hourly. The mobile hospital was more advanced than the facility that had been destroyed. I can't believe this is happening, she told her staff as they began treating patients with proper equipment for the first time since the storm. But the most remarkable change was in the people themselves. Mayor Williams organized volunteer crews to help with the cleanup, and participation was nearly 100%. Neighbors who had been strangers before the hurricane were now working side by side, sharing tools, food, and encouragement. Mike Thompson, the construction worker who had been so angry just days before, found himself leading a crew of volunteers in rebuilding homes for elderly residents. The president showed us that complaining doesn't fix anything, he told his team. But working together, that fixes everything. James Mitchell had become an unofficial morale officer, visiting families throughout the day and sharing updates on recovery progress. His military experience in logistics proved invaluable as he helped coordinate supply distribution. I thought I was done serving my country, he told his neighbor. Turns out I was just getting started. Trump called Mayor Williams every evening to check on progress and address any obstacles. These weren't ceremonial calls. He was actively problem-solving and cutting through bureaucracy. When a shipment of building materials was delayed by regulatory issues, Trump personally called the suppliers and resolved the problem within hours. 3 weeks after Trump's visit, Millbrook was unrecognizable, but in the best possible way. The town that had been devastated by Hurricane Maria was emerging as a model of disaster recovery and community resilience. Sarah's new diner was taking shape, and it was indeed larger and more modern than the original. But more importantly, it was being built by a combination of federal contractors and local volunteers. This isn't just my diner anymore, Sarah realized. It belongs to everyone who's helping build it. The town's infrastructure wasn't just being repaired, it was being upgraded to withstand future storms. New power lines were buried underground, the hospital was being rebuilt to Category 5 hurricane standards, and the levee system was being reinforced beyond previous specifications. Dr. Rodriguez had begun training local residents in emergency medical procedures, creating a community response team that would be invaluable in any future crisis. We learned that we can't always count on outside help arriving immediately, she explained. But we can count on each other. Trump's daily phone calls to Mayor Williams had evolved into strategic planning sessions. They weren't just discussing immediate recovery anymore. They were planning for Millbrook's long-term economic development. A small manufacturing plant was being planned, which would provide stable employment for residents. The most powerful change, however, was psychological. The people of Millbrook had discovered something about themselves that they never knew existed. They were capable of far more than they had imagined. The disaster had revealed their strength, but Trump's intervention had shown them how to channel that strength effectively. James Mitchell summed it up perfectly during one of the evening community meetings. We always knew we were strong. We just needed someone to remind us that being strong together is better than being strong alone. As the sun set over the construction sites and busy streets of Millbrook, it was clear that Hurricane Maria hadn't destroyed the town. It had revealed its true character. 6 months after Hurricane Maria, Millbrook was not just rebuilt, it was transformed. The town that had nearly died in the storm had emerged as a symbol of American resilience and community spirit. Sarah Chin stood behind the counter of her new diner, watching the breakfast crowd that had tripled in size. The diner wasn't just serving locals anymore. People drove from neighboring towns to eat at the restaurant that had become famous as the heart of Millbrook's recovery. On the wall hung a framed photo of Trump helping clear debris from the original site, signed with the words, "To Sarah and the people of Millbrook, never give up. Donald Trump." The town's population had actually grown since the hurricane. Young families, attracted by the new jobs and strong community spirit, had moved to Millbrook. The manufacturing plant was operational, providing 200 good-paying jobs. Property values were rising, but longtime residents were being protected through community land trusts that Trump's team had helped establish. Dr. Rodriguez now oversaw a state-of-the-art medical facility that served not just Millbrook but the entire region. The disaster recovery training program she had developed was being adopted by communities across the Gulf Coast. "We turned our worst experience into our greatest strength," she reflected. James Mitchell had been appointed to a federal advisory committee on disaster preparedness for elderly Americans. At 73, he was busier than he had been in decades, but he had never been happier. "Dorothy would be proud," he said, looking at a photo of his late wife that now sat on his desk in the community center. Mayor Williams had been invited to speak at conferences across the country about community-based disaster recovery. But she always insisted that Millbrook's story wasn't about politics. It was about what happens when people refuse to give up on each other. On the one-year anniversary of Hurricane Maria, Trump returned to Millbrook for the dedication of the new community center. Standing before a crowd that included not just locals, but visitors from across the region, he reflected on the journey. "A year ago, Maria tried to erase Millbrook from the map. Instead, she just gave you a chance to show the world what American spirit really looks like." The hurricane had lasted 18 hours. The recovery had taken a year. But the community that emerged would last forever, built on a foundation stronger than any storm could shake, the knowledge that together, Americans could overcome anything. As Trump's helicopter lifted off that evening, taking him back to Washington, the lights of Millbrook spread out below like stars. Each light represented a family, a dream, a life rebuilt. Hurricane Maria had brought darkness, but the people of Millbrook, with a little help from an unexpected friend, had chosen to create their own light.